The bar was quiet, except for the soft hum of air recyclers and the distant sound of ships docking. Commander Jake Morrison sat in the corner booth, his fingers wrapped around a glass of whiskey that had gone warm an hour ago. The amber liquid caught the dim light from the station's artificial sunset display, but Jake wasn't looking at it. His eyes were fixed on something far away, something only he could see. Kepler-442 was supposed to be neutral ground. After the war ended 3 years ago, the trading station became a place where humans and aliens could meet without fear. The corridors buzzed with activity as merchants from dozens of worlds conducted business. But Jake came here for the quiet, for the corner booth where nobody bothered him. The cantina door slid open with a soft whisper. Jake didn't look up until a shadow fell across his table. When he raised his eyes, he saw a Zephyrian standing there, tall and elegant like all of his kind. The alien's crystalline skin shifted from pale blue to nervous purple as their eyes met. "Commander Morrison?" The Zephyrian's voice was melodic, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "My name is Vexthil. I am a journalist with the Zephyrian Information Network." Jake took a sip of his warm whiskey and set the glass down carefully. "I'm retired." "Yes, sir. I know." Vexthil's skin flickered between purple and green. "I was wondering if I could speak with you about the war, about human combat tactics." "No." The simple word hung in the air between them. Vexthil shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His people were naturally graceful, but this one seemed young and uncertain. "Commander, my people still don't understand how humans managed to win. We had better technology, larger fleets, more soldiers. By every measure, we should have been victorious. But you turned the tide. How?" Jake looked at the young alien for a long moment. Vexthil's skin had settled into a steady blue color that Jake recognized as curiosity. During the war, Jake had learned to read Zephyrian emotions through their skin changes. It had kept him alive more than once. "You really want to know?" Jake asked. "Yes, sir, very much." Jake stood slowly, his joints protesting after sitting still for too long. Battle scars from Proxima Ridge made his left leg stiff, and shrapnel near his spine sent sharp pains down his back when he moved too quickly. "Follow me." They walked through the station's corridors in silence. Alien merchants and human traders moved past them, going about their business. A group of Altarian children played in one of the common areas, their 4 arms making complex patterns in the air as they chased holographic butterflies. The war felt like a lifetime ago in this peaceful place. Jake's quarters were small, but comfortable. The walls were bare, except for a single photograph of his old unit. 12 men and women in combat gear, standing in front of a damaged human cruiser. Half of them were dead now. "Sit," Jake said, pointing to the only chair. He remained standing, looking out the small viewport at the stars. "The Battle of Proxima Ridge," Jake began. "You probably read about it in your military reports." "What did they tell you?" Vexthil's skin brightened slightly. "That Captain Lisa Grant held a defensive position for 3 days against superior numbers. The report said she had some kind of advanced weapons system." Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Advanced weapons. Is that what they wrote?" "Yes, sir. Lisa Grant had 43 soldiers and a broken communications array. The Zephyrian force that came at us numbered over 400. Your people had plasma cannons, energy shields, and air support. You want to know what our advanced weapons were?" Vexthil leaned forward, his skin shifting to deep blue. "Desperation," Jake said, "and a captain who refused to let her people die without a fight." Jake moved away from the viewport and sat on the edge of his bed. The mattress creaked under his weight. Lisa Grant was 28 years old. She had been in command for exactly 6 days when your people attacked Proxima Ridge. The previous captain died in the bombing of Forward Base 7, along with most of the senior officers. Lisa was just a communications specialist who got promoted because she was the highest-ranking survivor. Jake's voice grew quiet as he remembered. The ridge was supposed to be a temporary position. We were waiting for evacuation ships that never came. Your fleet had cut off all escape routes. We were trapped on a piece of rock with limited supplies, and no hope of rescue. But the reports said she held the position, Vexthal said. She did. For 3 days and 3 nights, Lisa Grant turned 43 scared soldiers into something her people had never seen before. Jake stood and walked to a cabinet. He pulled out a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses, pouring drinks for both of them. Vexthal accepted the glass with all 4 of his delicate fingers. Day 1, Jake continued. Your people came at us with standard assault formations. Clean, organized, efficient. Lisa had us dig in behind the ridge's natural barriers. We used broken equipment and scrap metal to build cover. When your soldiers advanced, we hit them with everything we had. Jake took a drink and felt the burn of alcohol down his throat. But that wasn't what stopped them. It was what happened. Next, what happened? Lisa did something no Zephyrian commander would ever do. When your people regrouped for a second attack, she left the safety of our defensive positions and led a counterattack. Vexthal's skin went completely white. That's tactically impossible. She would have been outnumbered 10-1 in open ground. Exactly. Your people expected us to stay behind our barriers like good little soldiers. They didn't expect a human officer to charge straight at them with a rifle in her hands and murder. In her eyes. Jake sat back down, his memories pulling him back to that terrible day. Lisa ran straight into your formation, screaming like something out of hell. Behind her came 42 soldiers, who would have followed her into the heart of a star if she asked them to. What happened to the Zephyrian forces? They broke, Jake said simply. Your people are warriors, but you fight with honor and strategy. You had never seen anything like what Lisa Grant did that day. She didn't fight like a soldier. She fought like a mother protecting her children. Vexthal set down his untouched glass. His skin had turned a deep, troubled gray. Day 2, Jake continued. Your commanders sent in twice as many soldiers. They thought the first attack failed because of poor planning. Lisa knew they would come back stronger, so she did something even crazier. What? She divided our forces. Sent half our people to attack your supply lines while the rest of us held the ridge. Your people had to choose between chasing our raiders or maintaining the assault on our position. Jake smiled for the first time since the conversation began. Lisa was a communications specialist, remember? She knew how to disrupt enemy signals. While your commanders tried to coordinate their response, she jammed their frequencies with old mining equipment we found in the caves. Impossible. Zephyrian military communications are encrypted with quantum algorithms. Lisa didn't break your encryption, Jake said. She just made so much noise on your frequencies that nobody could hear anything. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones. Vexthal was quiet for a long moment. His skin cycled through several colors before settling on confused purple. Day 3, Jake said. Your people were angry. They sent in everything they had. Plasma artillery, aerial units, ground assault mechs. Lisa had 18 soldiers left, almost no ammunition, and no food. How did she survive? Jake's expression grew dark. She didn't. The room fell silent, except for the hum of the stations. Life support systems. Lisa Grant died on the morning of day 3, Jake said quietly. Plasma cannon got her while she was moving between positions. I was 20 feet away when it happened. Then how did the defense continue? Because Lisa Grant didn't just command those soldiers, Jake said. She inspired them. When she died, every single person on that ridge decided they would rather die fighting than surrender. We held that position for 14 more hours with a dead captain and no hope of survival. The evacuation ships, Vexthal said, finally arrived that evening. Your people had pulled back to regroup for a final assault. When the rescue ships landed, they found 17 survivors out of 43 original defenders. Jake finished his whiskey and set the glass on the table. That's what your military reports don't tell you. Lisa Grant didn't have advanced weapons or superior tactics. She had something your people couldn't understand then and still don't understand now. What? She cared more about her soldiers than she did about her own life. And they knew it. Vexthal stared at Jake for a long moment. His skin had turned completely gray, the color of deep thought among his people. Is that why humans won the war? The young journalist asked. Jake looked at the photograph on his wall. 12 faces staring back at him, half of them ghosts now. That's just the beginning, he said. Jake poured himself another glass of whiskey. The bottle was half empty now, but the memories were still crystal clear. Vexthal sat quietly in his chair, his crystalline skin slowly shifting from gray to a deep blue that Jake recognized as focused. Attention. Lisa Grant's story isn't the worst one I have to tell, Jake said. He walked back to the viewport and looked out at the stars. You want to understand how humans won the war? Let me tell you about Sergeant Danny Rodriguez. Vexthal picked up his untouched glass and held it carefully. Another hero? Danny was no hero when I first met him, Jake said. He was a demolitions expert from Earth's mining colonies. Rough around the edges, quick to anger, always getting into fights with other soldiers. His commanding officers considered him a problem. Jake took a sip of whiskey and continued. This was during the siege of New Terra. Your people had surrounded the entire colony with an energy shield. Nothing could get in or out. 50,000 civilians were trapped inside, slowly running out of food and medical supplies. I remember reading about New Terra, Vexthal said. The reports said the shield was impenetrable. It was. Your engineers built it using technology we couldn't even understand. The shield covered the entire planet like a soap bubble, powered by a massive generator facility on the surface. Our fleet tried everything to break through. Kinetic weapons, plasma cannons, even nuclear warheads. Nothing worked. Jake set his glass down and rubbed his face with both hands. The scars on his cheek pulled tight when he frowned. The people inside were dying. Children first, then the elderly. The colonial government was rationing food, but everyone knew it wouldn't last much longer. Our command estimated they had maybe 2 weeks before mass starvation began. What did? You do? We tried everything. Commando raids, electronic warfare, diplomatic negotiations. Your people refused to lower the shield unless the colony surrendered unconditionally. They wanted to use New Terra as an example to other human worlds. Jake walked over to his desk and opened a drawer. Inside was a small photograph of 3 people, a man in military uniform, a woman with dark hair, and 2 young children. He held it for a moment before showing it to Vexthal. Danny Rodriguez, his wife Amy, and their kids. Maria was 8. Carlos was 6. They lived on Luna Station while Danny served with the demolitions unit. Vexthal looked at the photograph. The family was smiling, gathered around a birthday cake. It looked like any normal family celebration. Danny volunteered for the mission to destroy the shield generator, Jake said. Everyone knew it was suicide. The facility was buried deep underground, protected by your best security systems. Getting inside would be nearly impossible. Getting out alive was completely impossible. Why did he volunteer? Jake sat down heavily on his bed. Because he had seen the reports from inside New Terra. Children dying of hunger while their parents could do nothing to help them. Danny had children of his own. He couldn't stand the thought of other kids suffering when he might be able to. Stop it. The room was quiet except for the distant sounds of the space station. Jake stared at the photograph in his hands. The mission took 3 weeks to plan. Danny would infiltrate the generator facility using a captured Zephyrian transport. Our intelligence team had identified a weakness in your security protocols. Supply ships were only scanned at the perimeter, not when they reached the facility itself. How did he get past the perimeter scans? Danny hid inside a water recycling tank, spent 18 hours breathing through a tube while the transport was inspected and cleared for entry. When the ship reached the facility, he cut his way out and began moving through the maintenance tunnels. Jake stood up and walked to his cabinet. He pulled out a small device that looked like a communication unit. This is Danny's final transmission. He recorded it while he was inside the facility, right before he activated the charges. Vexthal's skin turned pale blue. You still have it? I was his commanding officer. I kept it to remember what real courage looks like. Jake activated the device. Danny's voice filled the room, distorted by static, but still clear enough to understand. Jake, if you're hearing this, then I made it inside. The facility is bigger than we thought. Took me 6 hours to reach the main power core. Your Zephyrian friends really know how to build things. There was a pause, then the sound of explosions in the background. Security found me about 10 minutes ago. I'm trapped in the core chamber with about 30 of their soldiers outside. The charges are set, but I need to override the safety systems manually. That means staying here until the end. Another explosion, closer this time. Jake, I need you to do something for me. Tell Amy that I love her. Tell the kids that their daddy was thinking about them when he did this. And tell them that sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices to protect the people they love. The recording crackled with interference. The override is complete. The core will go critical in about 2 minutes. That should be enough to bring down the entire SHIELD network. Tell Amy that I'm sorry I won't be coming home. Tell her to find someone who can make her happy. The kids deserve a father who can be there for them. The sound of weapon fire could be heard through the static. One more thing, Jake. Don't let anyone call me a hero. Heroes save people and live to tell about it. I'm just a guy who couldn't live with himself if he didn't try to help those kids on New Terra. There's a difference. The recording ended with the sound of a massive explosion. Vexthal sat in silence for a long moment. His skin had turned completely white, a color Jake had learned meant deep shock among the Zephyrian people. Did it work? Vexthal asked quietly. The shield came down exactly 2 minutes after Danny activated the charges. Our evacuation fleet was waiting just outside the perimeter. They moved in immediately and began evacuating the civilians. Jake put the recording device back in the cabinet. 50,000 people lived because Danny Rodriguez decided their lives were more important than his own. Children who were dying of hunger got medical treatment and food. Families that had been separated were reunited. What happened to his family? Jake's expression grew sad. Amy never remarried. She raised Maria and Carlos by herself. They're adults now, both serving in the Colonial Defense Forces. Amy works as a teacher on Luna Station. She still keeps Danny's picture on her desk. Vexthal set down his glass without drinking any of the whiskey. I don't understand. Why would someone sacrifice everything for people he had never met? Because that's what humans do, Jake said. We don't fight for glory or conquest. We fight for each other. Danny didn't know the people on New Terra, but he knew they had children. That was enough. Jake sat back down and looked at the photograph of Danny's family. Your people are warriors, but you fight for your nation, your leaders, your cause. Humans fight for something different. We fight for the right of children to grow up safe. We fight for the right of families to stay together. We fight for the future. But the cost, Vexthul said. How can you ask someone to pay such a price? We don't ask, Jake replied. That's the point. Danny volunteered. Nobody ordered him to sacrifice his life. He chose to do it because he couldn't live with the alternative. Jake stood up and walked to the viewport again. Outside, ships moved slowly between the station's docking bays. Peaceful, normal, alive. After the mission, our command wanted to give Danny a medal, the highest decoration for valor. Amy refused to accept it. She said Danny wouldn't have wanted people to think he was special. He was just a father who did what any father would do to protect children. Did you agree with her? Jake was quiet for a long moment. I think Danny was wrong about one thing. He said heroes save people and live to tell about it. But real heroes save people and don't care whether they live or die. They just care about doing what's right. Vexthul's skin shifted to a deep purple color that Jake recognized as sadness. Is that why you won the war? Because humans were willing to die for strangers? Partly, Jake said. But that's still not the whole story. Danny's sacrifice saved New Terra, but it also taught your people something they hadn't expected. What? That every human in that war was potentially another Danny Rodriguez. Every soldier, every officer, every civilian was capable of making the same choice he made. Your military leaders realized they weren't just fighting an army. They were fighting an entire species that would rather die than surrender. Jake finished his whiskey and set the empty glass on the table. That's when your people started to get scared. Not of our weapons or our tactics, but of our willingness to pay any price necessary to protect what we loved. You couldn't understand it then, and most of your people still can't understand it now. Vexthul stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. These stories you're telling me, are they all like this? Worse, Jake said simply. Danny. Rodriguez died quickly and cleanly. Not everyone was so lucky. The young journalist's skin turned gray again. How many stories do you have? Jake looked at the photograph on his wall. 12 faces, half of them gone now. Enough to fill a book, he said. Every human who fought in that war has stories like these. We all carry them. Vexthul moved toward the door, then stopped. Commander Morrison, may I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Do you ever regret winning the war? Jake considered the question carefully. Jake refilled his glass with the last of the whiskey. The bottle was empty now, but his memories were still flowing like a river. Vexthul had been quiet for several minutes, his skin cycling through different shades of purple and gray. The young alien seemed to be struggling with something. You said the stories get worse, Vexthul finally said. I'm not sure I want to hear more. Then you should leave now, Jake replied. Because the next story is about what happens when humans get creative with desperation. Vexthul remained in his chair. His skin settled into a steady blue color. Her name was Kelly Brooks, Jake began. 24 years old, fresh out of technical school. She specialized in life support systems and environmental controls, not exactly frontline combat material. Jake walked to his desk and pulled out another photograph. This one showed a young woman in a green jumpsuit, smiling as she held a wrench in one hand and gave a thumbs up with the other. Behind her was a complex array of pipes and control panels. Kelly was assigned to the UES Defiant, a patrol cruiser that got caught behind enemy lines during the Battle of Wolf 359. The ship was damaged and trying to make it back to friendly space when your people found her. Captured? Worse than captured. Your people wanted to study human technology. The Defiant's engines were dead, weapons offline, but the life support was still working. So your fleet commanders decided to board the ship and take it intact. Jake sat down and looked at the photograph of Kelly Brooks. She looked so young, so confident, like she believed she could fix anything with the right tools and enough time. The boarding party took the ship without much of a fight. Most of the crew was already dead or injured from the battle. Kelly was unconscious in the engineering section when your people found her. They thought she was just another casualty. But she wasn't. Kelly woke up 12 hours later in the ship's medical bay. Your people had patched up her injuries and were keeping the surviving crew members alive for questioning. They wanted to understand how human ships worked. Jake stood up and moved to the viewport. A cargo freighter was docking at one of the station's lower bays, its running lights blinking in the darkness. The Zephyrian research team was brilliant. They understood our propulsion systems, our weapon designs, even our computer networks. But there was one thing they couldn't figure out. What? Why nothing worked the way it was supposed to? Jake smiled slightly. You see, human ships aren't built in factories like Zephyrian vessels. They're assembled in orbital shipyards by thousands of different workers. Engineers, technicians, mechanics, all putting their own personal touch on every system. Vexthu's skin brightened with curiosity. Personal touch? Modifications. Jury-rigged repairs. Creative solutions to problems that weren't supposed to exist. Every human ship is unique because every human engineer thinks they can improve on the original design. Jake turned away from the viewport and faced Vexthul directly. Kelly Brooks had been working on the Defiant for 2 years. She knew every pipe, every wire, every control circuit on that ship. More importantly, she knew every modification and repair that had been made during those 2 years. The Zephyrian researchers couldn't understand the modifications. They couldn't even find them all. Kelly had spent her time on the ship fixing problems and improving systems. She replaced standard components with better ones. She rerouted power cables to increase efficiency. She modified the environmental controls to run quieter and use less energy. Jake sat back down and continued his story. While the research team was trying to figure out why the ship's systems didn't match the original blueprints, Kelly was planning her escape. But she wasn't thinking about running away. She was thinking about taking her ship back. How could one person retake an entire ship? By turning the ship itself into a weapon. Jake's expression grew serious. Kelly knew something the Zephyrian researchers didn't. She knew exactly how to make the life support system very uncomfortable for unwanted guests. Vexthul leaned forward in his chair. The life support system? Kelly had been studying Zephyrian biology during her captivity. Your people are more sensitive to atmospheric changes than humans are. Different gas mixtures that are harmless to us can be toxic to you. Jake stood up and began pacing around the small room. It took Kelly 3 days to put her plan into action. She waited until the research team was focused on studying the ship's weapon systems. Then she began making small changes to the environmental controls. What kind of changes? She started by increasing the carbon dioxide levels in specific sections of the ship. Not enough to trigger the automatic safety systems, but enough to make your people feel dizzy and confused. Then she began introducing trace amounts of industrial chemicals from the ship's maintenance supplies. Jake stopped pacing and looked directly at Vexthul. Your people didn't notice at first, because the changes were so gradual. But within 6 hours, half the research team was experiencing severe respiratory distress. They had to evacuate the affected sections and seal them off. Vexthul's skin turned pale. She was poisoning them? Not exactly. The gas mixtures Kelly created were specifically designed to be harmless to human physiology, but toxic to Zephyrian biology. She wasn't trying to kill anyone. She was trying to make the ship uninhabitable for your people, while keeping it perfectly safe for herself. Jake sat back down and continued his story. The really clever part was how she did it. Kelly used the ship's existing systems in ways they were never intended to be used. She turned the food preparation area into a chemical laboratory. She converted the recreational facilities into gas production chambers. She even used the waste recycling system to distribute her atmospheric modifications throughout the ship. How did the Zephyrian team respond? Panic. They couldn't understand what was happening. Their environmental suits were designed for space operations, not for prolonged exposure to toxic atmospheres. The suit's filtration systems weren't equipped to handle the specific chemical combinations Kelly was producing. Jake's voice grew quieter as he remembered the details. Within 24 hours, Kelly had divided the ship into zones. Safe zones where humans could breathe normally, and hazardous zones where Zephyrian physiology couldn't function. She controlled the boundaries between these zones from the engineering section. The research team must have tried to stop her. They tried. But Kelly had spent 2 years learning every shortcut and hidden passage on that ship. She could move through maintenance, tunnels and service corridors that your people didn't even know existed. Every time they thought they had cornered her, she would disappear into the ship's infrastructure. Jake walked to his cabinet and pulled out a small electronic device. It looked like a standard military communicator, but it had been heavily modified, with additional circuits and components. Kelly built this during her 3rd day of fighting. It's a remote control system that allowed her to operate the ship's environmental controls from anywhere on the vessel. She could change atmospheric conditions in any section of the ship within seconds. Vexthil stared at the device. She built that from spare parts? Kelly was an engineer. Give an engineer enough spare parts and enough motivation, and they can build almost anything. Jake set the device on the table between them. By the end of the 4th day, Kelly had complete control of the ship. The Zephyrian research team was trapped in a single section near the docking bay, wearing emergency breathing equipment and running out of options. What did they do? They tried to negotiate. The team leader contacted Kelly through the ship's communication system and offered to release the surviving crew members in exchange for safe passage off the ship. Jake's expression grew grim. Kelly's response was very simple. She told them they had 10 minutes to evacuate the ship, or she would flood the entire vessel with a gas mixture that would kill them all within seconds. Could she have done that? Kelly had identified 17 different ways to create lethal atmospheric conditions using the ship's existing systems. She could have turned the entire vessel into a gas chamber if she wanted to. Vexthil's skin turned completely white. Did the research team evacuate? They left the ship in 8 minutes. Kelly watched them go, then spent the next 2 hours restoring normal atmospheric conditions throughout the vessel. When she was finished, she had her ship back. Jake sat down and looked at Kelly's photograph again. The Defiant made it back to human space 3 weeks later. Kelly had managed to repair the engines using parts salvaged from the abandoned Zephyrian research equipment. She even improved the ship's performance in the process. What happened to Kelly after the war? She became one of our most respected engineers. The techniques she developed on the Defiant were taught to technical personnel throughout the human fleet. Her improvised chemical warfare methods saved dozens of other ships that were boarded by enemy forces. Jake picked up the modified communicator and turned it over in his hands. But Kelly never forgot what she had done on that ship. She told me once that she could still smell the chemicals she had used to poison the air. Said the smell followed her everywhere, even years after the war ended. Guilt? Regret, maybe. Kelly knew that her actions had probably saved human lives, but she also knew that she had turned something designed to preserve life into a weapon designed to threaten it. Jake walked to his cabinet and pulled out a new bottle of whiskey. His hands shook slightly as he broke the seal and poured 2 fresh glasses. The trembling wasn't from alcohol. It was from the memory he was about to share. Colonel Ben Parker. Jake said quietly. If you want to understand why humans won the war, you need to understand what happened at Armstrong Base. Vexthel accepted his glass, but didn't drink. His skin had turned a cautious purple. I've never heard of Armstrong Base. Most people haven't. It was classified for years after the war ended. Even now, the full details are kept secret. Jake took a large swallow of whiskey and felt it burn down his throat. I was there. I saw everything. Jake moved to his desk and pulled out a thick folder marked with military classification stamps. Inside were photographs, maps, and official reports. He spread them across the small table between himself and Vexthel. Armstrong Base was the last major human stronghold in the Tau Ceti system, home to 53,000 military personnel and civilians. When your people overran the other colonies, Armstrong became a refuge for anyone who could make it there. Vexthel looked at the photographs. They showed a sprawling underground complex built into the side of a mountain. Massive blast doors protected the entrance, and defensive weapons covered every approach. The base was designed to withstand a siege, Jake continued. Food production facilities, medical centers, schools for the children. It was supposed to be self-sufficient for up to 2 years. What went wrong? Jake's expression grew dark. Your people didn't try to assault the base directly. They surrounded it with the largest army anyone had ever seen. 500,000 Zephyrian soldiers, plus support units and orbital bombardment platforms. They cut off every supply line and blocked every escape route. Jake pointed to a tactical map showing the base's position. Red markers indicated enemy positions in a complete circle around the mountain. Colonel Parker was in command. He was 52 years old, a career officer who had spent his entire life preparing for situations like this. But nothing could have prepared him for what he faced at Armstrong Base. The siege? The civilians? Jake's voice grew heavy. 15,000 children were trapped inside that base. Families who had fled from other colonies, expecting Armstrong to protect them. Parker wasn't just commanding a military installation. He was responsible for an entire city of refugees. Jake stood up and walked to the viewport. Outside, the peaceful space station continued its normal operations. Ships came and went, carrying cargo and passengers to distant worlds. It seemed impossible that such serenity could exist in the same universe as the horrors of war. The siege lasted 4 months, Jake said. Your people were patient. They knew time was on their side. Food supplies began running low after 6 weeks. Medical supplies after 8 weeks. By the 3rd month, people were dying. Vexthel's skin turned pale blue. Starvation? Diseases mostly. When you put 50,000 people in an enclosed space, for months, sanitation becomes a problem. The medical staff did their best, but they were running out of antibiotics and basic supplies. Jake returned to his chair and picked up one of the photographs. It showed Colonel Parker standing in what looked like a command center. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes. Parker faced an impossible choice: surrender and hope your people would treat the civilians humanely, or fight until everyone died. Neither option was acceptable to him. What did he do? Jake sat down the photograph and looked directly at Vexthel. He lied. To everyone. To his own people, to your military commanders, and to himself. I don't understand. Parker began something he called Operation Lazarus. He convinced his technical staff to create fake energy readings that suggested the base had developed a planet-killing weapon. Vexthel's skin went completely white. A planet killer? It didn't exist, Jake said quickly. But Parker made your people believe it did. He had his engineers generate massive power signatures deep underground. He transmitted fake technical specifications to make it look like humans had built some kind of super weapon. Jake pulled out a recording device similar to the one that contained Danny Rodriguez's final message. "This is a communication, Parker, sent to the Zephyrian Fleet Commander. On day 97 of the siege. Listen carefully." Parker's voice filled the room, calm and professional, despite the desperate circumstances. "This is Colonel Benjamin Parker, commanding officer of Armstrong Base. I am contacting you to inform you that continued bombardment of this facility will result in the activation of our planetary defense system." There was a pause, then Parker continued. "Our technical staff has completed construction of a seismic disruption device capable of destabilizing this planet's core. If my base falls, the device will activate automatically. The resulting chain reaction will destroy this entire world within 6 hours." Another pause. "I am not bluffing. Withdraw your forces to a safe distance, and we will negotiate terms for evacuation of our civilians. Maintain your current positions, and we will all die together." The recording ended. Vexthal stared at Jake in shock. He threatened to destroy the entire planet? Parker convinced your fleet commander that humans had built a doomsday weapon as a last resort. The energy readings were real enough to fool your sensors. The technical specifications were complex enough to seem genuine. Jake refilled his glass and continued the story. Your people took the threat seriously. They had seen what humans were capable of when cornered. The fleet commander ordered a partial withdrawal while his technical staff analyzed the data Parker had provided. Did they believe it? For 3 weeks, yes. Your people spent that time trying to figure out if the weapon was real and how to neutralize it. During those 3 weeks, a human rescue fleet finally broke through your outer defenses. Jake picked up another photograph. This one showed ships evacuating civilians from Armstrong Base. Long lines of people carrying whatever possessions they could manage, boarding transport vessels under heavy guard. The evacuation took 36 hours. Every civilian, every wounded soldier, everyone who couldn't fight was loaded onto the rescue ships and sent to safety. What about Colonel Parker? Jake's expression grew grim. Parker stayed behind with the skeleton crew to maintain the deception. He knew that if your people realized the weapon was fake too early, they would pursue the evacuation fleet. How many stayed behind? 1,200 volunteers. All of them knew they probably wouldn't survive. Jake's voice became quiet. I was one of them. Vexthal's skin turned gray with understanding. You were there at the end. Parker needed someone to operate the fake weapon systems while he coordinated the final defense. I spent the last week of the siege in the underground technical center, generating false energy readings and transmitting fake status reports. Jake stood up and walked to the wall where the photograph of his old unit hung. He touched the frame. Gently. On the final day, your people figured out that the weapon was a hoax. Their technical analysis finally proved that our energy readings were artificially generated. The fleet commander was furious at being deceived. What happened then? Your people attacked with everything they had. Orbital bombardment, ground assault, chemical weapons. They wanted to make an example of Armstrong Base for embarrassing them. Jake's hands clenched into fists as he remembered. Parker held the command center for 18 hours after the final assault began. He kept transmitting false reports about weapon activation timers, trying to buy more time for the evacuation fleet to escape. Did he succeed? The evacuation ships made it to safety. 51,000 people lived because Ben Parker convinced your military commanders that humans had built a weapon that didn't exist. Jake walked back to his desk and picked up a small metal object. It was a military communication device, heavily damaged by weapon fire. This was Parker's final transmission. He sent it directly to me in the technical center, 30 minutes before the command center was overrun. Jake activated the device. Parker's voice was strained, but still steady. Jake, the weapon readings are starting to fail. I need you to maintain the deception for as long as possible. Keep transmitting activation sequences even after I'm gone. The sound of explosions could be heard in the background. Tell my wife that I love her. Tell my daughter that her father died protecting other people's children. And Jake, when this is over, make sure people remember what really happened here. The transmission crackled with interference. We didn't have a superweapon. We didn't have advanced technology. All we had was the willingness to lie convincingly enough to save the people we were sworn to protect. The recording ended with the sound of weapons fire and shouting voices. Jake set the device down carefully. Parker died in the command center, still transmitting false weapon status reports. I maintained the technical deception for another 6 hours before the Zephyrian forces reached my position. How did you survive? I didn't fight them when they found me. I surrendered and told them the truth about the fake weapon. By then, it didn't matter. The evacuation fleet was too far away to catch. Vexthul was quiet for a long moment. His skin had turned completely gray. Colonel Parker saved 50,000 lives by convincing my people that humans had become monsters capable of destroying entire worlds. Jake opened the second bottle of whiskey, but didn't pour any. His hands were shaking too much now. The memories of the final story were different from the others. Darker, more personal. Vexthul sat perfectly still, his skin a deep gray color that seemed to absorb the light in the room. The last story isn't about heroism, Jake said quietly. It's about what happens when good people do evil things for the right reasons. Jake walked to his desk and pulled out a sealed envelope. The paper was yellow with age and marked with the highest level of military classification stamps. He held it for a long moment before breaking the seal. Major Nina Chun, Jake said. Psychological warfare specialist. The woman who figured out how to break your people's minds. Vexthul's skin went pale. Break our minds? Your people are telepathic. Not strongly, but enough to maintain emotional connections across long distances. Family members can sense each other's feelings. Military units develop psychological bonds that improve coordination and morale. Jake pulled a photograph from the envelope. It showed a small Asian woman in a laboratory coat, standing next to complex electronic equipment. Her expression was serious, almost haunted. Nina discovered that Zephyrian telepathy could be weaponized. She found a way to turn your greatest strength into your greatest weakness. Jake sat down heavily and opened the file. Inside were technical diagrams, psychological profiles, and medical reports. All of them stamped with warnings about classified information. This happened during the final year of the war. Your people were winning on every front. Human colonies were falling one by one. Our military leaders estimated we had maybe 6 months before complete defeat. What changed? Nina Chun volunteered to test her theories on herself. Jake's voice became very quiet. She wanted to understand exactly how Zephyrian telepathy worked, so she submitted to experimental procedures that allowed her to experience telepathic connections. Vexthul leaned forward. That's impossible. Humans aren't telepathic. Nina made herself telepathic, temporarily, using a combination of drugs, electronic implants, and surgical modifications to her brain. Jake picked up one of the medical reports. The procedure was supposed to last for 1 week, just long enough for her to understand how your people's minds worked. Jake's hands trembled as he turned the pages of the report. It worked. For 7 days, Nina experienced the world the way Zephyrians do. She felt the emotional connections between family members. She sensed the psychological bonds that hold your military units together. She understood how your entire society functions through shared feelings and mutual understanding. What did she learn? That your people's telepathy is based on harmony. Zephyrians can only share positive emotions and supportive thoughts. Negative feelings like fear, anger, and despair disrupt the connections and cause psychological damage. Jake stood up and walked to the viewport. Outside, the space station continued its peaceful routine, but Jake wasn't seeing it. He was remembering something much darker. Nina designed a weapon that could broadcast negative emotions directly into Zephyrian minds. Fear, despair, rage, hopelessness. All the feelings your people normally protect each other from. A psychological weapon? Worse than that. Nina found a way to use your own telepathic networks against you. When one Zephyrian was exposed to her broadcasts, the negative emotions would spread through their connections to other Zephyrians, like a virus of despair. Jake returned to his chair and continued reading from the file. The first test was conducted on captured Zephyrian soldiers. Nina exposed them to 30 seconds of concentrated fear and hopelessness. Within minutes, every Zephyrian within 50 kilometers was experiencing severe psychological distress. Vexthil's skin turned completely white. She attacked our prisoners? Nina volunteered to be the first test subject. She wanted to understand exactly what the weapon would do to your people, so she exposed herself to the same psychological attack she had designed. Jake picked up another medical report, this one much thicker than the others. The human brain isn't designed to handle telepathic connections. When Nina experienced the weapon she had created, it caused permanent damage to her mind. She spent the rest of her life in a specialized medical facility, unable to distinguish between her own thoughts and the emotions of everyone around her. She drove herself insane. Nina sacrificed her sanity to create a weapon that could end the war. She knew exactly what it would cost her, and she chose to pay that price anyway. Jake's voice became barely audible. The weapon was deployed 3 times during the final months of the war. Each time, it caused widespread panic among Zephyrian forces. Your people couldn't understand what was happening to them. Entire fleets would retreat rather than face the psychological attacks. Vexthil sat in silence for several minutes. His skin cycled through different colors before settling on a deep, troubled purple. "That's why the war ended," he said finally. "Not because humans defeated us in battle, but because you found a way to torture us into surrender. Nina's weapon broke your people's will to fight. But it also broke something inside every human who knew about it." Jake closed the file and put it back in the envelope. "We had become the kind of species that would drive an entire race insane to achieve victory." Jake walked to his cabinet and pulled out a small device that looked like a hearing aid. It was made of the same crystalline material as Zephyrian technology. "This is a telepathic dampener. Nina designed it during her lucid moments at the medical facility. It prevents Zephyrians from experiencing the psychological weapon's effects." She created a defense against her own weapon? Nina spent her final years trying to undo the damage she had caused. She couldn't restore her own sanity, but she could protect your people from future attacks. Jake set the device on the table between them. "Every Zephyrian civilian now carries one of these dampeners. Your military forces have them built into their equipment." Nina made sure that her weapon could never be used again. "Why?" Jake looked at the photograph of Nina Chun. The woman in the picture looked young and confident, unaware of the terrible choice she would make. Because Nina realized that winning the war wasn't worth destroying an entire species. She had created a weapon that could break the minds of billions of innocent people. The guilt of that knowledge was what finally destroyed her sanity completely. Jake sat down and finally poured himself a glass of whiskey. His hands were steady now, as if sharing the darkest secret had somehow calmed him. The war ended 6 months after Nina's weapon was first deployed. Your people signed a peace treaty rather than face the possibility of complete psychological collapse. And humans kept the secret? The weapon was classified at the highest levels. Only a few dozen people ever knew the full details. Most of them are dead now. Nina died 3 years ago, still believing she was telepathically connected to every person she had ever met. Vexto picked up the telepathic dampener and examined it carefully. The device was small and elegant, designed to be worn comfortably for extended periods. She could have kept the weapon, used it to ensure human dominance over the galaxy. Nina destroyed all the research data before she lost her mind completely. She made sure that no one could ever build another psychological weapon like the one she had created. Jake finished his whiskey and set the empty glass on the table. That's the real reason humans won the war. Not because we were braver or stronger or more clever than your people. We won because we were willing to become monsters to protect what we loved. And now we carry the guilt of what we did. Every human who fought in that war knows that our victory came from breaking the minds of our enemies. We saved our families and our worlds by torturing an entire species into submission. Jake stood up and walked to the photograph on his wall. 12 faces looked back at him, young and hopeful, and unaware of the moral compromises they would be forced to make. Lisa Grant died to protect her soldiers. Danny Rodriguez sacrificed his life to save children he had never met. Kelly Brooks turned her own ship into a weapon to survive capture. Ben Parker lied to everyone he trusted to save 50,000 civilians. Jake's voice grew heavy with emotion. Nina Chun destroyed her own mind to create a weapon so terrible that it ended the war. And every one of them made their choice, knowing exactly what it would cost. Vexto stood up slowly, still holding the telepathic dampener. His skin had turned a color Jake had never seen before, a deep, shimmering silver that seemed to reflect the light in complex patterns. What does that color mean? Jake asked. Understanding, Bextel replied, and fear, and respect, all at the same time. The young journalist moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back to Jake. Commander Morrison, may I ask you one final question? Go ahead. Do you think humans will ever fight another war like that one? Jake looked at the empty whiskey bottles, the scattered photographs, the classified files spread across his table. The ghosts of the war surrounded him like old friends who refused to leave. I hope not, he said finally, because if we do, there might not be anything left of our humanity to save. Vexthel nodded slowly and left the room. Jake was alone again with his memories and his guilt. Outside the viewport, ships continued their peaceful journeys between the stars. The war was over, but the ghosts remained.